On the morning of the 21st of October 1966, a school full of children was buried alive in Wales. 116 children died, 28 adults died. The company responsible had been warned it was going to happen. They had been warned in writing. 3 years before it happened, nobody went to prison. This is the story of Aberfan. Aberfan was a small mining village in South Wales, tucked into the Taff Valley, a few miles from Merthyr Tydfil. About 5,000 people lived there. Most of them had some connection to the coal industry. Fathers, brothers, uncles, underground, every day. The mine was called the Merthyr Vale Colliery. It had been there since 1869. By 1966, it employed around 1,400 men. In a village of 5,000 people, that was not just a job, that was the entire economy, the entire identity. Coal mining creates a huge amount of waste. Rock, shale, spent material, everything that comes out of the ground that isn't coal. And that waste has to go somewhere. From 1916 onwards, when the flat ground in the valley ran out of space, the National Coal Board started dumping it on the hillside, directly above the village. By 1966, there were 7 of these waste tips on the hillside, great dark mountains of coal waste piled on the slopes above Aberfan's houses and streets and school. The biggest one was called Tip Number 7. It had been built in 1958. By October 1966, it stood about 111 feet tall. It contained just under 300,000 cubic yards of waste, and there was a problem with where they had put it. Tip Number 7 had been built directly over underground springs. This was not a secret. The springs were on Ordnance Survey maps, the maps that the NCB would have had access to. The maps that had marked those springs since 1873. The ground underneath that tip was being fed by water from underground springs, constantly saturated, like building a mountain on top of a sponge. And directly below Tip Number 7, at the bottom of that slope, was Pantglas Junior School, a school full of children. Here is what makes Aberfan different from an accident. The tip had already moved, twice. In 1944, part of the tip complex above Aberfan slid, and again in 1963, 3 years before the disaster, Tip Number 7 partially shifted. The physical evidence was there, visible, on the hillside above the village. The National Coal Board spent days at the official inquiry, later denying that the 1963 slide had ever happened. There were witnesses, there was physical evidence. They still denied it. Between 1952 and 1965, the area around Pantglas School flooded severely at least 11 times. The residents noticed the floodwater was wrong. It wasn't clear. It was black. It left a dark, greasy film on everything it touched when it went down. That was coal slurry, seeping out of the tips above them, running down into their streets and gardens and through the school gates. They complained. Of course they complained. In 1963, the borough engineer for Merthyr Tydfil Council, a man named D.C.W. Jones, wrote a series of letters to the National Coal Board. The letters were headed, "Danger from coal slurry being tipped at the rear of the Pantglas schools." He wrote, and I want you to hear this clearly. He wrote, "I regard it as extremely serious as the slurry is so fluid and the gradient so steep that it could not possibly stay in position in the winter time or during periods of heavy rain. Not vague, not a general concern, specific, written down, sent to the people responsible." The NCB ignored it. And when villagers pushed harder, when they made noise about the tips above their school, the NCB made their position clear. "Make a fuss," they said, and the mine would close. Think about what that means in a village of 5,000 people, where 1,400 of them work at the mine. That isn't a warning, that's a hostage situation. The NCB never properly inspected Tip Number 7, not once. Their own engineers had never been involved. There was no tipping policy, no written rules about how to build these things safely. Not at Aberfan, not anywhere in the NCB's operation. The organization sitting above a primary school with a 111-foot mountain of wet coal waste had no plan for what happened if it moved. The week before the 21st of October 1966, it had been raining, heavily, persistently, the kind of autumn rain that fills ground that is already saturated. The ground beneath tip number 7, already full of spring water, already full of years of rain, was filling up again. On the morning of Friday, the 21st of October, it was still raining. It was the last Friday before the school's half-term holiday. The children of Pantglas Junior School had come in that morning, knowing they had a week off starting tomorrow. Assembly finished. The children walked back to their classrooms. They sat down at their desks. Up on the hillside, the men working at tip number 7 arrived for the morning shift. They noticed immediately that something was wrong. The surface of the tip had sunk overnight. A large depression had opened up, a sign that the material inside was shifting and saturating. The foreman tried to call the colliery to raise the alarm. The telephone line at the top of the tip was dead. The wire had been stolen. Scrap metal theft was common in the area, and nobody had replaced it. He had no way to call down the mountain. The fog that morning was thick. The valley was completely covered. The men on the tip could not even see the base of it below them. At 9:13 in the morning, tip number 7 gave way. A 150,000 cubic meters of water-soaked coal waste broke loose from the hillside. It moved fast, faster than you could run, faster than you could think. A wave of black liquid slurry about 40 feet high, tearing down the mountain. Nobody in the village saw it coming. The fog hid everything. They heard it. Survivors said it started as a low rumble, deep, far away, and then it got louder very quickly, like something enormous coming at speed. By the time anyone understood what it was, there was no time. The slurry hit a farm first and demolished it. It took out a row of houses. It burst the water main of an old canal nearby, and millions of gallons of water joined the flow, making it faster, making it deeper, making it worse. Then it hit the school. Pantglas Junior School took the full force of it. The slurry was liquid enough to pour through windows, heavy enough to collapse walls. It filled the classrooms in seconds. Children were buried at their desks. Some were crushed by falling masonry. Some suffocated. Some were killed instantly. The whole thing took about 5 minutes. Then there was silence. Survivors said the silence was the most disturbing part. One moment, a roaring wall of black moving through the school. Then nothing. Absolute stillness. The only sound was the rain. The first people to start digging were not emergency services. They were local people, parents, neighbors, miners who had just come off shift, or who were pulled up from underground early. They arrived with garden tools, pickaxes, bare hands. They tore into the black slurry with whatever they had. The miners organized the rescue carefully. They knew unstable ground. They knew how to work in it without causing further collapse. Their specific knowledge, earned underground over decades, is the reason any children came out alive. Fire and ambulance services were called almost immediately. The first injured children reached St. Tidfield's Hospital by 9:50, but the window was closing fast. The last child pulled out alive was an 8-year-old boy named Jeff Edwards. He was rescued at 11 o'clock in the morning, less than 2 hours after the slide. After 11 o'clock, no more survivors were found. It took nearly a week to recover all the bodies. Half of Pantglas Junior School's children were gone. 116 of them. An entire generation of that village. Some families lost 2 children. There were parents who identified their child by a prefect's badge because it was the only thing left that they recognized. It was a Friday. The last Friday before half-term. Those children would have had a week off starting the next morning. The man in charge of the National Coal Board was Lord Alf Robbins. When the disaster happened, Robbins was in Guildford. He was being installed as Chancellor of a university. He finished the ceremony. Then he travelled to Aberfan. He took 36 hours to get there. While he was accepting his academic honor in Guildford, the NCB was telling the government that he was personally directing the relief operation at Aberfan. He wasn't. He was in Guildford. When Robbins eventually arrived and spoke to the press, he told them the disaster could not have been predicted. He said the springs beneath the tip had been previously unknown. They were on the Ordnance Survey map. They had been on the map since 1873. A formal tribunal of inquiry was set up immediately. It ran for 76 days, 136 witnesses, 300 exhibits. When it published its findings the following year, the verdict was clear. The Aberfan disaster could and should have been prevented. 9 NCB staff members were named as bearing responsibility for the deaths of 144 people. Not one of them was prosecuted. Not one of them went to prison. The man specifically criticized by the tribunal for his ignorance of tip safety, the man who should have been inspecting these things and wasn't, was subsequently promoted to the NCB board. The NCB's compensation offer to the families of the dead children was £50 per child. When families protested, they raised it to £500. They called this a generous offer. After the disaster, the public donated almost £2 million to the Aberfan Disaster Memorial Fund. 88,000 donations from people all over Britain and around the world. Money raised for the bereaved families, for their grief, for their recovery. The remaining tips above the village still needed to be removed. They were still dangerous. The NCB refused to pay for it. The government, a Labour government under Harold Wilson, agreed with them. In 1968, they forced the trustees of the Memorial Fund to hand over £150,000 from the money the public had donated to pay for removing the NCB's tips, the tips that had killed the children. The government demanded £350,000 initially. It was reduced to £150,000 after protests. There was, as one survivor put it, outrage. That money was eventually paid back in 1997, nearly 30 years later. The same flat amount, £150,000, without a penny of interest. By that point, inflation alone had made it worth a fraction of what was taken. It wasn't until 2007 that the Welsh Assembly finally gave the Memorial Fund the inflation-adjusted amount, £1.5 million, to properly restore what had been stolen from those families nearly 40 years earlier. Lord Robbins never accepted personal responsibility for Aberfan. He died in 1999. There is a memorial garden today on the site where Pantglas Junior School used to stand. The school is gone. The garden is in its place. In Aberfan Cemetery there are 2 long rows of white arched headstones. 144 names. Every year on the 21st of October, people come. A clock from inside the school, stopped at 9:13 a.m., was kept for 55 years by the son of a first responder who was there that day. In 2022, he donated it to the National Museum of Wales so it would not be forgotten. The tribunal said it best. Not villains, but decent men led astray by foolishness or ignorance or both. Failure to heed clear warnings, total lack of direction from above. A mountain of waste, built over a spring, above a school, with no policy, no inspection, no plan, and a warning letter sitting in a filing cabinet somewhere, 3 years old, that nobody had done anything about. 116 children. It was a Friday, the last day before the holiday.